I'm going to attempt to explain a little more difficult passage, some of the question types, some more examples. In a previous video, I went through the first combo method for this particular reading passage, and you would have seen that in another video. I want to talk about a little more about command of evidence, detail questions, especially those questions that connect with different with inference or main idea questions. Inference questions, generalization, cause effect, comparative, sequence of events, author purpose, main idea, the main purpose of the text, analyzing arguments, and then the study of writing, how a specific writer, why would the writer choose a specific phrase or text structure or something along those lines, and then looking at charts and graphs, although this one doesn't look at so much at charts and graphs. So without further ado, let's get into a few more specific examples of this, and this is where I'm going to move my fat head. As a reminder, I already explained this in a previous video. I'm just going to go through another example. So in a previous video as well, I talked about this one in terms of being the combo method. We didn't spend any more than 5 minutes reading it. So now we're going to go on and spend about 13 minutes doing this particular reading passage. Or 13, remember, no more than 13 minutes. So then we've got some time to do that. So which choice reflects the overall sequence of events in the passage? Again, this is one that you could potentially skip because it's one that could be more difficult for you because if you're not quite understanding the passage, the sequence of events, inference type of question. So maybe we skip it. Maybe we come back to it. We talk about it, and I kind of gave away the answer. But if I'm looking at the overall sequence, an experiment is proposed but proves unworkable. No, we know it worked, so that doesn't work here. I'm going to put my drawing out and eliminate a new discovery leads to reconsideration of a theory. No, it's not that. An anomaly is observed and simulated experimentally. No, it's not an anomaly. An unexpected finding arises during the early phases of a study. This is when Ken is talking about his father got back and he's setting up this experiment for the model species about how game birds are learning to fly. So during the phases of a study, the study is modified in response to this finding, and the results are interpreted and valued. So the birds were using their wings and legs cooperating. That single observation opened up a world of possibilities. Then it starts talking about how he modifies the experiment based on that aha moment. So that's why D is our best answer. Inference sequence of events. We notice that this one might be one that could potentially be connected to another question with detail, but it isn't. So this is we get a vocabulary and context question, and we go and read the lines around it. As used in line 7, challenge most nearly means what? So when a group of graduates who challenged him to come up with a new idea and the age-old ground-up tree debate. So challenged in this context is meaning required, no, not necessarily required, disputed, not disputed, competed with, no, there's no competition, so dared. Dared is our best choice. Personally, I don't think that's the best choice either, but out of those, that's the best choice. Which statement best captures Ken Dow's central assumption in setting up the research? So here's another main idea generalization. Do we have a connecting one to this? Let's ask ourselves this. Yes, we do. So let's look at 24 and 25 together, grouped together. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? And the key word in the previous question then is the central assumption in setting up his research, right? So at field parents, lines 1 through 4, does that give a central assumption? The ground birds ran along. No, just an observation there. Line 6 through 11, does that give a central? So when a group of graduates challenged him to do data on the age-old ground-up tree debate, he designed a project. So that certainly is an assumption, right? 16 through 19. When the cowboy stopped to see how things were going, Ken showed him his nice. Explained how the rancher was incredulous. No, that doesn't set up an assumption, right? 23 through 24, does that set up an assumption? At first, it seemed a natural. Ground was like the ground, but as he thought about it, Ken realized that all species he'd watch in the wild preferred to rest on ledges. So that kind of does, but it really doesn't. That's details once he set up his research. So the main idea is what he uses to set up his research. So it would be B, and basically talking about how the ground up tree debate and designed a project to see what clues might lie in how baby game birds learn to fly. So then the acquisition of flight in young birds sheds light on the acquisition of flight of their evolutionary ancestors. That's certainly possibly true. The tendency of young birds to jump erratically, no. Young birds in a controlled research setting are less likely than birds in the wild to require perches. No, that wasn't any assumption. Ground dwelling and tree climbing predecessors to birds evolved in parallel. No. So A is our best response here. The acquisition is using young birds to study this age-old theory. In the second paragraph, the incident involving the local rancher mainly serves to. So here's an author purpose. What's it doing, right? So we already looked at the rancher a little bit already. See how sometimes our questions, well, the rancher was incredulous. He took one look and pretty clever. What are those birds doing on the ground? They hate being on the ground. Give them something to climb on. At first, it seemed unnatural. Ground birds don't like the ground, but as he thought about it, ground birds don't like the ground. But as he thought about cameras, all the species he watched are preferred to rest on ledges and low branches. So, what is the local rancher? Why did that story come up? It shows how an anticipated piece of information influenced his research, right? He changed as a result of that. It doesn't reveal his motivation. It doesn't underscore certain differences between laboratory and field research. This is all field research. It doesn't introduce a key contributor. No, it shows how so it's, again, this is a purpose, author purpose question. Why would the author include that little anecdote in the story? This is a detailed question, right? Command of evidence. His aha moment led to his aha moment. After Ken Dial had his aha moment, so what did he do after line 41 in that aha moment? The birds were using their wings, and that single observation opened a world of possibilities. He came up with experiments that they raised up textured ramps, tilted at increasing angles. The partridges began to flap, but they angled the wings differently than the birds, differently from birds in flight. So this is he adjusted the inclines, right? So he didn't try to train the birds to fly to their perches. He didn't study videos. He didn't consult with other researchers. He observed. The next paragraph is where you would look in that detailed question. The passage identifies which of the following. The passage identifies which of the following is a factor that facilitated the baby chukars' traction in steep ramps. The speed at which they climbed. As a factor that facilitated the baby chukars' traction in steep ramps, the speed at which they climbed, the position of their flapping wings, that seems like a plausible one, the alternating of wing and foot movement, which of the following is a factor that facilitated the baby chukars' traction on the steep ramps. So, where's the steep ramps part? Textured ramps and increasing angles, but they angle their wings differently from bird and flight. They using the force not for lift to keep their feet firmly pressed against the ramp. They aim their flapping down and backwards, using their force not for lift, but to keep their feet firmly pressed against the ramp. It's like a spoiler on the back of the race car. So, they tried to train the birds. It's a factor that on the steep ramps, the alternation of wing and foot movement, the continual hopping motion, the position of their flapping wings. It seems. Maybe I'm wrong here, but I didn't answer this particular question in advance. So I'm going to go over and double check my answer. They began to flap, aiming their wings down. So the position of their flapping wings, right? It was key there when they kept their foot down. Document. So this is an example of, we went back and looked at the steep ramps and the traction. So this is a perfect example of a command of evidence detail question. We took words. All I did was I modeled that I took keywords in the passage and I went back to those where I found those and then matched up answer choices based on what the passage said. Same thing with the vocabulary and context, right? As it's used in line 61, document most nearly means what? 28. Document most nearly means is document in line 61, where if we're using wind assisted incline running around document in a wider, it only allow young birds to use the ticket where for wing assisted incline running when not documented in a wide range of species. Document. So we're seeing the term document here means Portray, no. Record, yes. Publish, it's not publishing yet. Process, so it's most likely record, um, based on the context of the passage. Okay, here's an inference question. What can be reasonably inferred? Inference, right there, right? About gliding animals from the passage. Or which choice provides the best? And then you can see it's connected to a detail on the inference question. Use the keyword above to help us with that. So we know gliding animals. Gliding animals is a keyword in the question stem that will help us. So we want to look for the evidence about gliding animals. 4 through 6. Does it talk about gliding animals a little bit? They jumped up like popcorn, describing how they would flap their half-formed wings. Well, kind of, but not really. 28 through 29. Checking 28 through 29. They really only use the ground for feeding, so he brought in some hail base for the chickers to perch on. No. Talking about gliding. 57 through 59. 57 through 59. Increasing traction and handling. The birds were doing the very same thing with their wings to help them scramble up otherwise impossible slopes. Okay, kind of, but let's see. 72 through 74. Does it talk about gliding? In an evolution where it takes on the sprite, with one fell swoop, the dolls came with a viable organ for the flapping flight of stroke, something gliding animals don't do, and thus a shortcoming for the tree down theory. Here's the keyword gliding. Ooh, ding, 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 ding. We found the keyword with one fell swoop, the dolls came with a viable origin for the flapping flight stroke of birds, something gliding animals don't do, and thus a shortcoming in the tree down theory. An aerodynamic function for half-formed wings, one of the main drawbacks to the ground up. So this where is kind of a compromise, so that we know that might be the context for what it's saying, right? 72-74. So what can reasonably be inferred from gliding animals? Their young tend to hop along besides their parents. No, it didn't say that. That can't be reasonably inferred what it said. Their method of locomotion is similar to that of ground birds. No. They use the ground for feeding. Didn't say anything about that. They use a flapping stroke to aid in climbing strokes. They use a flapping. They do not use a flapping stroke to aid in climbing slopes. They do not use a flapping stroke to aid in climbing slopes. That can be reasonably inferred. The viable origin for the flapping flight stroke of birds, something gliding animals don't do. They don't use a flapping flight stroke, right? That can be reasonably inferred based on the passage. So what we did there, it's a detail that we looked up the detail for. We looked up where we're talking about gliding, and we used this as a clue, and then based on the passage, we know that it talked about how they were using the flapping stroke to aid in climbing slopes, but the gliding birds don't do that, so they do not use a flapping stroke. That can be reasonably inferred. A cause-effect relationship here. A cause-effect relationship would be the type of inference or generalization that it would be. So again, just another example for how this goes. Like if as far as what you would be doing to attack the passages. Do you have to memorize the types of questions? Absolutely not. Be on the lookout for questions like this, so that are combined together, and tackle those as a combination. Those evidence questions. We had 2 sets of those. Those come up a lot in the SAT. Again, keep track of your time. 13 minutes because there's 5 passages. Each are 10 questions. You don't want to spend any more than 13 to 14 minutes. If you're struggling with the hard question, like the overall sequence of events, or the or a hard question like maybe 27, or one of those types of harder questions, skip those and take your best stab if you're really running out of time, right? Because I'm showing you how to tackle these in the best possible way. But if you're running out of time, don't spend too much time with something and then you don't get to the rest of the passage. Hopefully this kind of jogged your memory. If you're a senior this year, remember taking these back in December of 2019.